The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Peter came to Jesus and said, "Lord, how often should I forgive my brother or sister if they sin against me? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him, and, as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything.' The lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay what you owe.' Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave, as I had mercy on you?' And in anger, his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart." The Gospel of the Lord. I have a question for you. Would you describe yourself as basically a loving person? I hope so. Now, would you say you're as much of a forgiving person as you are a loving person? If there was any hesitation in your answer, or if your answer was an honest no, then Jesus' words in today's gospel are for you and for me. Because the power to forgive is different from the power to do harm. The power to forgive comes ultimately from God. It is the power of the cross, a power arising out of the vulnerability of love. The power to do harm comes from the power to coerce and to control. That is why trying to force someone to forgive, as happens all too often in Christian circles, is such a contradiction in terms. Forcing someone to forgive is a contradiction in terms, because the power to forgive is the very same thing as the power to love. That quote is from one of my favorite contemporary theological writings, The Ministry of Reconciliation, Spirituality and Strategies, by the late Father Robert J. Schreider of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. It's only 130 pages. I highly recommend it. The Ministry of Reconciliation, Spirituality and Strategies. I share it with you because in today's gospel, it kind of sounds like Jesus is giving us an ultimatum. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart. It basically sounds like you better forgive or else. But just like last Sunday, when Jesus didn't so much prescribe a punishment to be imposed on those who refuse to listen, as he simply revealed the consequence of what happens when we refuse to listen to anyone. That is, we become isolated and for all practical purposes separate ourselves from the rest of the community of believers. So in today's gospel, Jesus isn't so much saying God is going to zap you with a punishment from on high, as he is simply revealing the consequence of what happens when we refuse to forgive our brothers and sisters, that is, anyone and everyone, from the heart. And to illustrate this, he gives a pretty striking parable. But like so many of Jesus' parables, which we've heard so many times, the impact they had on his contemporaries when they heard it the first time is generally lost on us. So I want to listen again with new ears, as if for the first time. Are you with me? Okay, here we go. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Okay, let's pause there. 10,000 talents. How much do you think that's worth? Maybe $10,000? That is a lot of money. I'm pretty sure none of us has $10,000 just lying around for us to use to pay off a debt. But $10,000 isn't even a drop in this bucket, because a talent was the largest unit of measure in the ancient world, although it varied depending where you were. In Jesus' day, the Hebrew talent was 6,000 denarii, and a denarius was 1 day's wage. So if one talent was 6,000 denarii, or 6,000 days' wages, that was worth just under 16 and a half years of work, not counting days off. Then 10,000 talents would be 60 million days' wages, or 164,383 and a half or so years of work, not counting days off. That is a lot more than $10,000. But the point of the parable was not to illustrate the implausibility of the slave's request, "Have patience with me and I will pay you everything." Because even if he started the very day Jesus told this parable, this poor slave would still have 162,000 years to go, not counting days off. But as I said, that's not the point of the parable. The point of the parable is to give us a glimpse of the sheer magnitude of God's forgiveness, of the limitless capacity that God has to forgive. Ask yourself honestly, how much are you willing to forgive? But before we answer this question, let's be clear about what forgiveness is and is not. Forgiveness is not calling it even. Sometimes we say we've forgiven someone when all we really did was call it even. You scratched my car. You pay for it, and we'll call it even. No hard feelings. That is not forgiveness. That is just calling it even. A polite form of retaliation. And the limits of that are obvious, because there are some hurts that cannot be undone, that nothing will ever be able to make up for. And let's be honest, even polite retaliation often goes beyond, far beyond, calling it even. Forgiveness is also not a matter of forgetting. Forgive and forget, although it may sound like it's from the Bible, is found nowhere in the Bible. Jesus never said these words, because that is not forgiveness. Just like calling it even, forgetting is merely an attempt to move on from the evil. And forgiveness is always about some evil, about something not good. Otherwise, there would be nothing to forgive. The problem with forgetting is that it trivializes and dishonors the victim, making light of what they have suffered, or of the victim themselves, not taking seriously the reality of their pain. At best, forgetting is just not dealing with the evil, and at worst, it is a re-victimization of the victim, burying them and their pain. So, if that's not what forgiveness is, then what is forgiveness? Quite simply, to forgive is to overcome evil by choosing to love again. To forgive is to overcome evil by choosing to love again. To forgive is to say, not necessarily to a person's face, because the choice to love, to will the good of the other, may in fact mean no contact with them, at least for a time, because their further harming you would not be good for them. Okay, so to forgive is to say, you did something evil to me, but I choose to work through it, to become free from its power over me, to the point where I can love you again, where I can truly want the best for you again, from my heart. That is what it means to forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Now, if that sounds completely crazy or impossible, that's because the power to forgive comes ultimately from God. When you have been wronged, when you have been robbed of your dignity even for a moment, you simply don't have what it takes to forgive, to do all that I just described. And nobody should try to force you to do what you are simply not able to do at this moment. The only way is to call on God. Because not even Jesus on the cross said, I forgive you, to his executioners. Now, he also didn't say, you're going to pay for this, or forget about you. No. He said, what did he say? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. That is the first step of authentic forgiveness, the first step of overcoming evil through love. It is to call on God, who is the source of the power to forgive. It's to say, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive this person, but God, I ask you to forgive them. And in that moment, you will have begun to participate in God's limitless capacity to forgive, God's limitless capacity to overcome evil through love, which he inaugurated on the cross. The deeper the hurt, the longer this process will take. It may even take your whole life. But the day will come when God will bring you through it, when God will free you from it, from this prison of unforgiveness which has cut off your ability to love. And on that day, we will be able to forgive, because forgiveness is the triumph of love over evil. One of my favorite quotes about forgiveness is from the late Christian Reformed theologian and pastor Lewis B. Smedes, and it goes like this. To forgive is to set a prisoner free, and to discover the prisoner was you. The only way to conquer evil is through love, and forgiveness is the triumph of love over evil.